Okay, I will be explaining, let's say, the academic and political context in which the project goal was issued, and of course provide quite an overview of the project, and in a more academic perspective explain where we currently stand and the research that we have conducted so far. And closely linked to what I will be explaining, to this, let's say, more descriptive part, Professor Abat will focus his presentation on explaining one of the project's main outputs, which is the explicit EU social contract between the inhabitants, not citizens of the European Union, but inhabitants, and the EU, the European Union itself. So, yeah, having this said, I will begin. So I think that when we think about the social contract, the first idea or the first thing that comes to our mind is Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes, even Kant, who could be considered the founders of this theory. Later, let's say that other scholars such as Rawls, Gautier, Scanlon revisited the theory and included, let's say, some additional considerations. And well, but in any case, the main idea of the theory of the social contract has always been, let's say, legitimating the legitimation of power. So why then should we talk about the European Union social contract in the 21st century? I don't think it's to legitimize the power of the European Union, but well, it's more directed into the fact that we live in an increasingly globalized, contested, and complex world, and that we are facing numerous challenges, right? Like populism that you are dealing with in the work package led by Scuola Sant'Anna, insecurity stemming from the conflicts we are now experiencing in the neighborhood of the European Union, climate change, digitalization, or other different challenges, right? And all these issues can, let's say, endanger the democratic systems as we know them nowadays. So I think that this is where social contract theory becomes relevant as an, let's say, as an element or as a tool to address these challenges and to revisit this general agreement or this fundamental agreement between citizens and institutions through which the institutions base their work. So this is the context in which the goal was more or less created. As indeed, as you mentioned before in the introduction, the metaphor of the social contract has been continuously referenced by European Union institutions, and especially some actors such as Benoît Acar, who was a member of the executive board of the European Central Bank, as a tool to, let's say, address or respond to the economic crisis that the European Union and Europe was facing. Similarly, Frans Timmermans, former Vice President of the European Commission, and Antonio Costa, at the time he was Prime Minister of Portugal, also referenced and asked for a renewal of the EU social contract. And even, let's say, in a more international or global sphere, the United Nations have also, let's say, continue with these calls of renewing the social contract. And at the same time, these more institutional references have also been echoed by the academic field, with some scholars such as Costas Ducinas, Etienne Balibar, Boaventura de Sousa Santos, or Calypso Nicolaidis, among others, who have been also calling for this renewal of public debate on the creation of a new pan-European social contract. So the aim of the project, based on this context, is to create a more inclusive, democratic and sustainable social contract in the European Union. And linked with this, let's say, main overarching objective, we have three main ideas. On the one hand, determining what the EU social contract is, which is not an easy question. I remember that when we knew that we were awarded with a project, one of the first things we did was asking ChatGPT what the EU social contract was, and ChatGPT replied that it was the EU treaties. as well some scholars have been arguing on this line, but we don't think it's as simple as that. No? So we argue that the EU social contract is the application of the social contract theory to the European Union Association Pact, no? Right? So it's a social contracts between the citizens and the European Union itself, and also between the member states and the EU. And as you all know, it's not a fixed, let's say, document, to call it somehow, because the EU is continuously adapting, but there are some common elements, such as let's say, a series of political and social rights since the very beginning of the communities. Since 1992, with the Maastricht Treaty, a set of shared foundational values, and since the 2000, a series of fundamental rights after the entry into force of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. So obviously, and I was mentioned before, the main objective is trying to determine what is the EU social contract, and at this point, we believe that the EU social contract could be seen as the metaphorical pact of association between, that created in the 50s and that now keeps on renewing the European Union. It's an agreement, a tacit agreement, that defines which are the main elements of the political associations that differentiate the EU from other political groups, political entities, different entities. So basically, it enwrites the purposes, aspirations, constitutional identity, ethics, and morality of the European Union. And all the contracting parties, let's say the EU member states that enter the European Union, enter it freely, and they surrender a part of their sovereignty in order to achieve peace, security, and well-being. And the idea is basically that with this surrendering this part of their sovereignty, once inside the contract, they should be in a better state in terms of security and freedom than if they were outside the agreement. So we consider that the EU foundational values and principles, as outlined in Article 2 of the TEU and the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, are the constitutive part of the social contract of the European Union. No? Let's say the raison d'être. So they are pre-contractual, which means that any member states of the European Union, any new member state of the European Union that wants to, let's say, access or be part of the European Union needs to accept them before being part of it, as you know, something related to, for instance, the Copenhagen criteria. No? We were talking before about the Tigani-Debert debate between Schmidt, Bockenförde, Rudolf Schment, Hermann Heller, and we agree that we cannot impose, let's say, a unique vision on what EU values are. Rather, we quite agree with Schmidt's vision on that it's not possible or feasible to impose a uniform vision of or interpretation of this value across all EU member states. But we also believe at the same time that despite there is not such a unique interpretation of the values among the 27 EU member states, there are some, let's say, homogenizing factors or elements that play a role in setting the limits of this different interpretation. No? As I was mentioning before, one example is the Copenhagen criteria, but we also have the role of the Court of Justice of the European Union, and even if it is outside the EU itself, the European Court of Human Rights. So you will be later developing this, so I will stop here and move to the other two main objectives of the project. On the one hand, as I was mentioning at the beginning, the social contract is subject to some stressors, challenges that may create political instability or erosion the trust of the European Union, and thus the European Union must be protected from this. Not only the European Union, but also the European Union social contract must be protected somehow from this, let's say, challenges. So a significant part of the project is devoted to analyzing these factors, understanding how they may have an impact on the EU social contract, and protecting the EU social contract from these challenges in order to ensure some stability in the European Union. I will later develop a couple of more comments on this, but and linked to the overall objective of the project, which is to strengthen democracy in the European Union and to promote citizen participation, deliberation, and decision-making. We propose, let's say, the main idea of the project is breaking away this symbolic nature of the social contract theory by creating a tangible or express document, let's say, a contract. So, of course, us being, let's say, academics proposing a contract to be accepted and applied to all citizens in the European Union or inhabitants, as we consider, could be some elitist. So what we propose is rather that the EU inhabitants themselves participate directly in this process of deliberation and decision-making in order to determine what's the content of the social contract of the European Union, and at the same time, this document will result in let's say, their visions being translated into a document, and at the same time receiving some kind of popular democratic validation. And indeed, this is where the name of the project comes from, right? Because on the one hand, we are looking for an explicit or express social contract, and on the other hand, because we are, let's say, giving the voice to the citizens and letting them express on how they believe the European Union social contract should look like. So, of course, we are embracing a challenge of redefining somehow the social contract theory, moving beyond this symbolic nature. And although it will, of course, include elements from Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, or other authors, we are leaning towards more the ideas of Charles Mills, Carol Bateman, Mino Shafik, or Costas Ducines, as I think you will be developing later, Antoni. So the idea is, as you were mentioning before, in order to achieve these objectives, we have formed, let's say, a multidisciplinary consortium with 11 partner institutions from 9 countries, and it has, let's say, incorporates philosophical, legal, anthropological, and political scientific approaches. So the idea is that, well, the members of the consortium are us as the coordinating partner, Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. Second, yeah, maybe we cannot see it. Perfect. Then University of Copenhagen, whose main contact person, let's say, is Jacob von Holderstein. Here, Sant'Anna, of course, being Giuseppe Martinico, the leader of Work Page 5 on Populism. Molde University College with our friend Kutay. Sabancı University in Turkey. Central European University in Hungary, represented mainly by Dimitri Kochenov. The European Movement International, which is, let's say, the only non-academic partner we have, and which is mainly in charge of disseminating the draft of the EU social contract and trying to promote this citizens' participation, deliberation, and decision-making. Dublin City University, represented by Federico Fabrini, Universidad Carlos III with Juan Mayoral, and finally University of Essex in the UK with Julia Gentile. So as I was mentioning before, and just to conclude, I will just explain how we structured the research in our project. So you will see that it's more or less really linked to what I was with the 3 objectives. On the one hand, we are trying to determine what the EU social contract is through the theoretical framework, which is the moment in which we stand today and at this time. We are now starting, let's say, the research of the disruptive elements, which is a word that came given from the call I was mentioning before, the word challenges, but the call indeed gave us the word disruptive challenges. So we adopted this terminology, and they will be, let's say, researched in a sectoral way, meaning that first there are 7 work packages dealing with these elements. On the one hand, insecurity, encompassing the war in Ukraine, the genocide in Gaza, including also some secondary effects, such as could be migration crisis or energy insecurity in the European Union. Populism, linked to the growing political polarization, the rise of extremist ideologies in the European Union, and the rise also of nationalist sentiments. Gender, focus on the exclusion of certain groups from the social contract, not just limited to women. We are also tackling other members of this or members of the LGBTQ+ community. Climate change, connected to the effects of climate change and the eco-social crisis. Mistrust in relation with increasing disaffection of citizens towards institutions and politicians, not only in the European Union, but also at national level. Digitalization, addressing the impact of technological advancements such as artificial intelligence on our society. And finally, health, exploring how the COVID-19 pandemic was addressed and trying to let's say, outline potential future responses to other health crises that let's hope we don't have. So, as I was mentioned before, these elements are on the one hand addressed individually, and then in work package 11 they will be addressed let's say cross-sectorally, meaning that, for instance, now we are in Pisa and you are dealing with populism, how populism may be intersected by other disruptive elements. And although I'm not an expert on populism, the first idea that comes to my mind is the US elections that were mentioned before, and how Elon Musk, Twitter, and Donald Trump profited this social media in order to win the elections. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that at the moment we were drafting the call, these were the main disruptive elements we came up with. Of course, there are some others, such as could be racial elements, the demographic challenge that the European Union is facing today, education, and of course, the European Union keeps evolving day after day. So there are some elements that may be introduced into the debate, such as the creation of the European Army. So, finishing with these disruptive elements, finally, and as I was mentioning before, the idea of fostering citizen engagement and participation. There is a whole work package debated to this, and well, as I was mentioning earlier, Professor Abat will be addressing this through his presentation, how we understand the EU social contract, how we believe that that mainly he will be explaining why we believe that an explicit social contract in the European Union is the best way to make it more inclusive and to address the main critiques that the social contract theory has been receiving over history. So, having this said, I conclude here my presentation. But just before finishing, let me thank you once again all the team in Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna, and for the invitation, for hosting us, for organizing the event, and of course all the audience for the attention. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So first of all, I want also to thank our colleagues here in Sant'Anna, Francesca, Biondi, Professoressa, perché I read you, so I mean it's nice to see you. When you have read something, I didn't saw you, but now I see you, so it's happy to find the person who is writing what I read in constitutional law. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much again. I had a very good morning learning from Professor Fossum's presentation and Roberto's comments, and it is again an honor and a pleasure to be here in front of Professor Deladone, Professor Pierdominici, and Professor Kutay, who are going to comment things. So my presentation, I promise, is going to be short. I mean, for someone from the Iberian Peninsula, it's hard to talk in this time because it's siesta time. So our brains are not made to work at this time. But I will do my presentation brief and hopefully concise and precise. I'm going to first talk about what Jorge Piñera already mentioned, some details that I think we need to add. Then I would like to explain where are we now in the project, which is the challenge that we are now facing. And I will try to summarize very briefly again how we will respond, or how do we believe that an express draft of a social contract will help to respond theoretical but also empirical criticisms to contractualism and social contract theory. So what I wanted to remark, and I think it's very important, is that we are not in an elitist project. I mean, to decide what the social contract is not our call. I mean, we are doing these kind of presentations and asking the people what they think about the social contract. And I'm always starting with the same question. I mean, I'm here to listen to you, not to explain you. For me, it's more important to have the feedback about what do you think the social contract as a device is, but also the content of a potential social contract. What do you think it should be included or not? So our project is focused and based on the listening about what he mentioned inhabitants, but I will also, and now I will play with the concept of residents that Professor Fossum already mentioned, because Article 15 of the Portuguese Constitution says that it is addressed the human rights. I don't exactly remember the wording, but it talks about resident. The Portuguese Constitution is based on human dignity, not of Portuguese, but human beings. And they recognize residents in Portugal as holders of rights, not only human rights, but also political rights. So this non-Rousseauian, because we are trying to detach from the concept of citizenship, this understanding of inhabitant, which was also mentioned in the preamble of the failed, I don't think was failed, but failed constitutional crowdsourced experience in Iceland. And this Article 15, let's say, constitutional spirit of residents, of include those who are not citizens in something which is the constitutional, the social contract project, this is what really moves us. Then I'm asking the people, not only in academia, not only in schools, we go to schools to do talks, but also in different areas where they are not asked normally what they think, what is a social contract. We explain very basically what a social contract can be and which are the contents that they want to be included. So I want to remark that it's very important for us from the day one to the last day of the project to be clear that we want to escape, to avoid this potential elitist exercise, because we don't believe it is, and we will struggle and take means and actions in order to be clear that this is not an elitist exercise. Don't be mistaken, we are talking about a draft of a social contract, but the goal is not the social contract per se. The goal is the discussion, is following Charles Mill's recommendation in a last book that he wrote with before he passed away with Carole Pateman in a kind of a dialogical exercise. Charles Mills was contesting and responding some of the criticism, saying, well, you know, at the end of the day, we don't need a social contract, but what we need is the people to get involved and to discuss about this. So this is exactly what is our goal. I mean, we are not thinking in a social contract ending as a treaty. We don't even know which kind of legalistic or EU instrument will be. But what we aim, which is not so, let's say, it's more realistic, is to have a recommendation at the end of the project, knowing what the people, as we have the means to achieve a lot of people within the project with the European movement, what they think. So the idea is to put the debate on the table and allow the inhabitants / residents to participate. This is exactly what we want. And then trying to send something which has been submitted to the Moi residents to be discussed by the EU institutions. Then this is the idea. We believe that discussing these kind of topics, discussing this kind of disruptive elements we have already mentioned, the people can get included, can feel included, can also think, this concept of authorship that we work in constitutional law, mean somehow authors of what they have been discussing, arguing, and including of a potential draft that it will be discussed with the institutions and will end with some recommendations to the European Union. So one of the, as you will see, this is already a very experimental project. We face from a theoretical, and we need to admit that, from a theoretical perspective, that moving from the allegory, moving from the metaphorical to something express, moving from the tacit to something consensual, expressed consensual, that's why it's expressed quadrat, right? Because we want that you express yourself first, and then the second one is with your expression, but also we have something tangible, something that you can read as a recommendation of a social contract. Then we believe that we will inspire, as I said, integration, discussion, but also we aim to promote the respect of the EU values. Jorge mentioned Schmidt, but I think the one that we follow is more ex Bogenforde. In these discussions of the Tyrannie des Werten and the values of the German constitution after the Second World War, and that has been transposed somehow in Article 2 of the treaty. So our understanding is, and this is something which is clear for us, that if you want to sit and talk, to participate as individual, I'm not talking now about member states or institutions, you need to assume that there is a frame, a boundary that you cannot cross, which is these values which are enlisted in Article 2. I mean, we understand that Article 2 values are in evolution. This is something that we know, that probably 20 years ago, Article 2, the values of Article 2, rule of law, democracy, not that much human dignity, but some of it can make an evolution or a regression, depending how do you make the judgment, right? But the point is, and this is what we claim, that member states, when accede to the European Union, which is a voluntary act, they have the commitment, and this is what it really matters at the end of the day in pragmatical sense, they have the commitment to respect what Article 2 says, not how they interpret in their own constitutional frames what Article 2 means. So we commit, let's say Hungary, let's say Italy, let's say Spain, we accept, we commit to respect what Article 2 says and how EU institutions make the interpretation of the concept of Article 2. So we want to transpose this to the people who is asked to participate. So what do you think the EU social contract can talk about? A lot of things, all these disruptive elements, aging and others. But there are this red line, there are these values that you cannot put at stake when you're participating in this social contract, right? This is our idea. Then, this is more or less what I wanted to add to Jorge's presentation. Then the second point that I want to develop is, where are we now? Where are we now? So we are now starting to draft a first, let's say, document on the discussion on the social contract. And we are facing a dilemma that we knew already, but we are now sitting and facing a dilemma. So we can take either a more contractualist civil law let's say, more anti-Hegelian perspective, meaning that is a contract with a contractual form, right? Meaning parties, preamble parties, rights, obligations. That's in a very contractual sense. Or on the other hand, we can take, let's say, a more public, that will be used private law, a more public law, meaning a sort of declaration with a frame, and starting to discuss. Let's think, for instance, about the declaration of the citizens of Paris in 1789, this format, right? So we are now thinking which will be the best way, kind of declaration, public declaration, or a contractual form, in order to, again, the goal is to engage debate with the people. So I have my opinions, but I am not the only one. On the contrary, we have in Pisa, we have with Professor Kutay, and we have with other members of the consortium this discussion now. So it's, at the end of the day, it can be relevant, but it's a matter, I think it's a more formal matter about how do we present the document to the people, of course, with clear language, plain language, etc., etc. So this is where we are now. At the same time, in a moment that we are facing a lot of resistance, populism, Euroscepticism, fascism, neo-fascism, etc., I believe that the use of the concept of social contract is, as we do, is a way to participate in what the Germans call the Begriffkampf, right? So I'm honest with you, and let's record. I've never been very afraid about these things, but we do not want that Euroscepticism, fascist, etc., use the concept of social contract in order to have more theoretical or practical tools to weaken the European Union. So in a theoretical domain, we are struggling in this Begriffkampf, and we are very happy to be where we are discussing these issues. And this is and related with the last of the elements that I wanted to discuss today is why we do believe that an express social contract, despite that we are risking somehow we can even denaturalize, I accept, from the transit of the metaphorical to the and allegorical to the express, we are risking to denaturalize the whole idea. By the way, the theory of justice of John Rawls has been like the new awakening of social contract theory. But as Norberto Bobbio said in The Future of Democracy, and I fully agree, it was not a social contract theory, the one of John Rawls. So, maybe we are playing again, we are incurring, or even this theoretical, whether it fits or not with, let's say, a more orthodox understanding of the concept of social theory, of social contract. Despite this, we believe that despite that it will allow us to engage and to discuss, etc., it will help us to answer, and this is very Charles Mill tendency, some of the criticisms, some of them by Charles Mill himself on gender, Carole Pateman on gender, Charles Mill on race, but also Marxist approach to social contract theories, labeling them as a bourgeois example. Well, also law can be under the Marxist theory a bourgeois concept, and also liberalism. So we believe that through this discussion, through the debate, through the deliberation, we can include, through and respecting these disruptive elements, some of the answers to the criticisms on gender inequality or race inequality, not equal opportunities, etc., etc. This debate, and how do we end by typing something which will hopefully wrap up the different participation, and in the process will help us to discuss to respond from a theoretical perspective, all this Marxist, gender, race, liberalism, neoliberalism, critics, but also on the other hand will allow us to engage in the EU as a scenario from a more pragmatical example. I think that's more or less it, what I wanted to say. I can, of course, I will be very delighted to answer your questions and comments. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Thank you for this interesting presentation and for having clarified also the theoretical framework of the project, especially regarding the concept of the evolutive concept of social contract, the actors, the content also of this contract. Particularly interesting is also the reference to residents or inhabitants for me, and for my research on migration and the inclusion also of their country national or people that are not necessarily citizens of a territory, of a state. And also the link between social contract and participation, engagement. So many are the topics that are really interesting on our table. So now we have our discussion with Lorenzo Pierdominici and Acar Kutay, and I invite our speakers, our discussant to the floor. Yeah, we have four floors, so I go to the first line. Just a few words to introduce our discussant. Leonardo Pierdominici is Senior Assistant Professor in Comparative Public Law at the Department of Legal Studies at the University of Bologna. He previously worked as a research associate at the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies of the European University Institute, and amongst his publications, a special mention deserve The Mimetic Evolution of the Court of Justice of the European Union, a Comparative Law Perspective, edited by Palgrave, but also di Evoluzioni, Rivoluzioni, Involuzioni, il costituzionalismo israeliano nel prisma della comparazione, Walter Kluwer. Chadam. And the other discussant, really thank to Acar Kutay. Acar is professor at the Faculty of Business Administration and Social Science of the Molde University College. He's currently involved in the Express 2 project. His research revolves around the application of critical approaches to organized group in civil society, European governance, governance theory, global politics, and he works for many universities around the European Union, and amongst his publications, a special mention deserve governance and European civil society, governmentality, discourse and NGOs, and also NGO, civil society and structural changes. So really happy to have you with us, and please come to the floor. No. No, maybe.
Please. Okay. Okay. It's the same. Yeah, I can. Please go ahead. I can start. I don't know where to start. But I can start. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to start by your kind host, being a very kind host. That was very nice and pleasant visit. And it has been already very productive morning by Professor Fossum's opening presentation and following discussion. I simply don't know where to start, because my comments would be in a way posing questions to a further debate, and also thinking aloud together. So I have some questions because I'm also part of the project. So these are the questions I do also ask myself. So that is, and this includes, starts with this, as you have mentioned, this is applying critical approaches. So I will have this critical, let's say, hat in mind, and starting also problematizes the use of with the concept of the social construct in the first place. Well, Jorge made a very nice introduction and contextualized the use of social contract in European milieu by actors and practitioners. So that was really helpful. Actually, before coming, I did also my homework. That is European social contracts. I'm Googling and research, and I came across similar material. And actually, it is fascinating, this executive board of the European Central Bank speech that he made in 2013 in Harvard, Cambridge. So that is remarkable. I think that speech deserves a publication and reflection and publication in itself. So that is one takeaway. I would like to, well, I can't, some long quotes from there, because that is maybe discursive analysis and unpack the argumentations. But there are several issues that I would like to remind and invite us to rethink again. He starts with Europe is also a political union. The social contract exists both within countries and across countries. So one thing, this is the construct you mentioned, it's a contract between countries. But you mentioned, it's especially, that is also the contract, that is a contract inviting citizens. So that actually kind of contract at international level, that also does not exist also at John Rawls' law of peoples, because it's also a contract between states. So that is one aspect, let's say, to move forward. For instance, Thomas Fogge, later he takes, but his contract brings individuals, also has a duty on individuals. So that is one aspect to underline. I do not want to go into detail about, because very contradictory, he mentions, brings in white first Thomas Hobbes, make association EU and Leviathan, which is actually very surprising. Then he makes a switch and makes association with EU is realizing Kant's dream of constitutionalizing international law. I think perhaps that is also what he underlines, is perhaps also the, later I will turn again, the foundational myth that is also both true and and he says this construct is now at risk. This is his own words. The social contract needs revisiting. So that I would like to, so if the construction, Kant's dream of constitutionalizing international law and Europe as a domain of peace, and also the realization to rule of law, if everything goes fine, why need a new social contract? What is to be revisited? So, because from this picturing the structure, institution, laws, we're all fine. But now, due to the challenges, what he underlines, I skipped this area, this nationalism and protectionism. He's also, in some part of the speech, he mentions protectionism, now putting the EU contract into challenge. So if the institutional setup and the constitutional or functional constitution was fine according to the practitioner, so why need it? So if the machine works, so that's one of the issue. And then another that is actually more remarkable than I would this, I will skip some part of the speech. I have to, Danny, connects this to Europe's fiscal discipline. So that is actually, for instance, the new fiscal compact requires all member states to run a balanced budget over the cycle, similar to the responsibility of individual states in this country, United States. Under the recently uploaded two-pack legislation, the Commission will have to sign off on national budgets before they are approved by parliaments. This is a more intrusive role than the US federal government has vis-a-vis the states. Fiscal policies are at the center of contract because trust in the currency requires trust in the sovereign. So this is one interpretation and usage of contract, and one interpretation put into debate. So why I would like to, I started with this, bring this issue at the, let's say, the core and the highlight when we debate, as you mentioned, Begriffkampf, but it is more like, it is more than a Begriffkampf between scholars themselves, but it looks like also the meaning and use of a philosophical theoretical concepts also by practitioners. So it appears also that the use of the social contract opens a new contest between different actors. For instance, when you look at Jorge, also rightly nicely addressed, I also came across social actors, civil society actors have different usage and meaning of social contract. They take this as an opportunity from, let's say, after overall, I came across several actors like Greens, and our partner, European Movement, and European Trade Union Cooperation, they all have their own interpretation of contract, which they use the contract as an opportunity to discuss about European Union. But also, perhaps there is also an issue. In the morning, we discussed Michael Soward. There is also a kind of a claim to use this opportunity to speak on behalf of Europe's constituency. So this is an opportunity that is also a performative, let's say, tool that is utilized. So I think when we move further, we need to keep in mind this is how a philosophical concept is used in a context and integrated into the political politicization of the EU on one hand, and also the, let's say, philosophical original meaning of the concept in the text. I think that is because when we stick to this, let's say, directly application of a concept, there are several issues. Perhaps I will mention some of them, but it seems to be more promising than to keep in mind how the concept is utilized, maybe somehow even deformed. The original meaning distorted, but integrated into a context. So one meaning that I also, from your speeches that I extracted, social contract has association with acquis communautaire, EU constitutional values, norms, rights. So how do we separate what social contract means and what is the constitutionalization of the EU? Then it is going me back all 2005 and 6, the old debate. So that is, and then this EU constitutional debate, constitutionalization debate, then EU's attempt, all this Biondi and European civil society, European public sphere debate. So what is going on now different than before? So another issue, social contract we mentioned, we don't want some voices, rightly, to be included in a like you said, right-wing populist. So it also means it is already, there are some exclusions. So what are the criteria of excluding from the contract? And returning to now the scholarly use of the contract, I would like to ask whether and how can this issue be examined by the help of philosophical theoretical tools themselves, social contracts. I already mentioned Rawls' idea. There we have a fair procedure, but we don't do this. But also there is another approach internationally that is has become also influential. Martin Nussbaum suggesting going beyond the social contract, where she suggests the capabilities approach, which starts with listing outcomes, entitlements that has to be secured to citizens if the society in question should be minimally a just one. So is this kind of the way that we would follow? That is not a procedure, but then entitlements and outcomes. So then it is more capabilities approach and Nussbaum. And secondly, it also seems that idealist or more moralist approaches may not be the more effective starting point, because we are talking about it rises here and now in this context after, because all these issues also in the work package, migration, the digitalization, all this contextualized crisis, because there is a crisis hitting Europe here and now in this context now. So we need to provide an immediate problems. So that is undeniable realist element in a political theoretical terms in this debate. So when I was also pondering, I thought that are we referring to the first political question, as Bernard Williams suggests, a question that will with how to establish and maintain a sufficiently stable political order question. So that is, and also to continue with Williams, then if that is the question, because it is contextualized and it is, we are dealing with concrete problems, don't we move from contract theory to more Williams' basic legitimation demand? The question, why should we, the people in this political society, accept the power structure and political authority that govern us? So these are thinking loud. So this is also to highlight, underline that is the limitation of social contract. Another issue that is, if EU had a contract, let's say, and that one part of, as the executive board member highlighted, providing war and peace, we take it correct, and that was the case, because that was a land of peace and also wealth, and it's also a land for the realization of liberal international order in terms of international theory. Is this contract also now under challenge? Also, the partly and mainly, there are all these events, but also there is now, I think, we look at Europe now, but also around border in the east, there are radical changes and important changes happening. First and foremost, the war in Ukraine and before Ukraine, because that change, but actually that's one of these kind of contemporary projects that I would like to now connect it to that I and myself would like to contribute perhaps later in the project, that also radically challenged the EU's ethos, perhaps also the telos, because this idea of the EU as a territory of providing this dream has become also a challenge. Now, after 2016, EU has to change his foreign policy doctrine, because now describing, adapting to the geopolitical problems the EU has experienced in his neighborhood. So this is actually a fundamental challenge, because that war, in a way, triggered EU the question what EU is and what EU stands for. That is opening up interesting, actually, for also social contract theory-wise, interesting boxes, black box, because that's actually interesting line. Some international relations theories, they introduce the concept of ontological security. So let's say this pre-war era, that is this where EU is focused on realizing war and peace and realizing international liberal order. It also provided ontological security to its member states, that is also citizens, provided both a cognitive and also normative framework. But now that is, because of the imminent war now and the imminent threat, that is now fear, anxiety, and disruption of this narrative that EU provided. So that how far should we take this into question? Because first time in EU documents, now there is reference to EU has to deal with the geopolitical order, EU has to deal with power politics. This is one of the main questions that came to my mind when I was thinking about the contract, not to focus much on in the territory, because what goes outside has a direct effect on what goes also inside. So then why are we now talking about social contract? I think that is also an important question. One aspect is polycrisis, but also again, foundational myth, crisis has always been a motor of further integration. So connecting to the crisis period, that seems to be that Ukraine, the war crisis seems to be a kind of the first crisis that is not providing this motor to further. So that is I will, but I can't read all of them because my notes expanded during the way. So I would like to actually come to my last point, not to take much time. You mentioned about contractualism, this contract individual law. That has also forced me to associate this with what happened in public administration with new contractualism. So that is how far or to what extent will we be able to separate it from what happens in the new contractualism, meaning that partners always establish this relationship between different, engage in contractual relationships. We send our kids to school, we have the contractual relationship, we have an internet agreement, we have a contractual relationship, but that is a model based on individualization. So if we go and adapt, my worry is, so are we giving up the citizenship model, political union model idea, or more Republican ideas to market-oriented? So my brief worry is this, couldn't that path to lead to strict individualization and strangely fitting into the more EU's functional economic model of providing market discipline and economic freedoms. So that is perhaps no strict solution, no strict answer, but just pausing and pulling out some questions to move forward, particularly keeping in mind the limits and limitations of first social contract, maybe some other concepts theoretically may be more relevant, and another way, perhaps the most useful scholarly and research-wise way, is to meaning and use of social contract in this very moment of crisis is an opportunity to, let's say, recall the problems of the institutions, but also opportunity to speak on behalf of Europe's social constituency. That's
Or we wait we should answer now because there are a lot of comments.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, thank you very much for your comments, and I will try to answer some of them because there were a lot, and I will need. I think this is recorded, so we will listen again because some of them are more theoretical, others are more pragmatical, and so I'm going to start from what I believe is the most, let's say, I don't know if it's important is the word, but you were talking about what's the difference between 2005 and today in the terms of material constitutional. All of us, we know Federal we talk about material, not formal constitutionalism. Well, I think that in 2005, there was not, and this is also related with another question that we were talking about, why we are talking today about social contract, right? So I think I can link with an answer both questions, I hope. So the thread, I'm going to start the origins, and that's why Jorge was mentioning of the social contract theory, put it in the agenda of the European Union, came
after the crisis, oil crisis that affected the EU, and basically they are related of the lack of solidarity among EU member states. So, and also among citizens of the European Union. So the idea was to strengthen solidarity, to justify solidarity again in the European Union. Don't forget that the origins of the European Union, of the Union came after a Second World War with anguish, fear to have a new war basically between Germans and French. And the way to stop this after the experience of the First World War, humiliation to Germany, was the opposite. We learned as Europeans experience that Germans were not the ones to pay all the rebuild of the European Union, of Europe, right? So the vehicle was the contrary, solution, solidarity. Let's work together, a project market because of the experience of Europe, etc. So let's imply solidarity. This, how it worked in 2005 was that apparently liberal states, more liberalism states, was weakening the concept of solidarity among the member states. Therefore, it came, if you see the names that we're mentioning, basically are social democratic. They were stressing the need of a new, renew the social contract in the sense that we are linking again to our origins, to generate more tools of solidarity among Europeans. Okay, so that's why we are now talking again about the social contract in origin. Then, of course, as you're mentioning, as we know, the social contract, and that's why I mentioned the grief camp, can be used as theoretical, etc. But this is the origin. Why is it the agenda? And it came back stronger after the pandemics. Okay, so to justify that Italians and Spaniards will receive thousands of millions to recover our economies, and they were paid by the union. Okay, so this strengthens the concept of solidarity, this need of to legitimize again the solidarity among us, among Europeans. That's why we see the agenda. What happened in 2005, which is different now in 2024, is Brexit, which is also existential threat to the union, and how serious is Euroscepticism, etc. Nowadays, and the prediction was that the union was more under pressure, let's say, more at stake to some extent. Therefore, that's why that makes a difference between 2005 and today, and we are using the social contract in order to respond to this threat of is another tool to respond to this potential threat that populist and blah 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 blah. That's, I think, is a big difference between 2005 and now. Why I'm also referring to the origins of the European Union and the potential war between Germans and French, and this is related with the war in Ukraine. You are saying that the war in Ukraine is touching again upon one of our existential elements of the Union. I agree. Even I would say even more. I really believe what I'm saying. It's not. I think that one of the triggers that caused the war in Ukraine was that Ukraine wanted to join the Union, wanted to have the commitment to respect the Article 2 Copenhagen criteria and fundamental rights. Meaning, we are one of you. We want to be one of the family, not only the NATO, but this. Therefore, this trigger, this was a trigger. There was another element, among others, that ended in of the brutal invasion of Russia to Ukraine. Right? This is a direct appeal to you. We are already one. And this makes a difference before what happened in the 90s in the war, the beginnings of the 90s in the war of Yugoslavia. By the way, Bolzano is very close to Slovenia. Slovenia was not in war, but very few. The effects of the war of Yugoslavia and Slovenia were few, but the people in Bolzano, the people near the border, Europe, they had angst. They were also having, but it did not. The repercussion was not the same as it's happening in Ukraine now, because the Union has evolved a lot, politically speaking, and because it's the element of one of the main causes of the element of the war in Ukraine, in difference of Yugoslavia, nationalism, blah, 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 of states, is the values of the European Union. So, in my understanding, we are not de jure, but de facto in war in Ukraine. Right? So, this is the role that the European Union needs to play. And this is a way, you mentioned, and I think you were assenting, saying yes, crisis has been the way that we have used to then generate more and more integration and solidarity. Things, but not only in Europe, I think this is happening as a political trend in a lot of places around the world. And this experience is now, you see the response to the people of Ukraine, then we can discuss about other wars, and we can discuss why we are not reacting the same way with the refugees from Syria, or with people who is genocide in Gaza, etc., etc. But I think this is a very qualified, different element that links us with what is happening in Ukraine. So this is one of the things that I think is related with some of your points. An important thing, don't ask too much ChatGPT, because I did it in a paper, I answered, and this comes with the foundation of the myth, which ChatGPT is not talking about, of course. But if you ask to ChatGPT, we did that in Coimbra, with who I am married, ChatGPT is telling that I'm married with a woman that I don't know. For now. So far. My wife, right? So I don't. ChatGPT is saying. So, I mean, this is a caution when we are listening to ChatGPT. It is true that he's talking about treaties, blah blah blah. In the paper, I wrote a paper which is going to be published now in the UI, blah blah blah. Says, but it doesn't touch upon this myth, right? This ideology, this symbology, what it means. So it is a very basic, which general understood what the social contract is. But the European Union also born with a social contract. The original pact, and this is related with Hobbes. This is a Hobbesian, very strict definition of Rousseau and Hobbesian understanding of social contract as a pact, as an agreement that gives a new political entity, and you are providing to the sovereign some tools in order that they will respect, they will protect you, and will achieve peace among ourselves. It fits perfectly with what is happening between again Germans and. So this is, we are renewing this solidarity not only with Germans and French, but also with Italians, for instance, the 27 member states. The last question: how do we differentiate what we have in Scottish? I mean, I strict individualization to share. This is also something that I'm thinking about. But in a moment that you are threatening basic fundamental rights, I believe that there is not only one answer to provide, there is not only one response to these different threats to the fundamental rights, and one of them may be that individualization, this strong individualization, not necessarily linked with liberalism or neoliberalism. So individualization is not necessarily liberalism, right? In my understanding, because it can be, but not necessarily. It's risky. It's risky. I know. But this is true. This is true. Then I don't know. You said, but well, yes. I have also here quoted Ninet, which is the stability in Greek that were used by all these political organizations that were analyzed by Aristotle, Plato, basic political virtue, stability, etc., etc. And I also, I don't know why here wrote Millet. Yes, because Millet was in his speech of presidential speech, he said, "Oh, today the people of Argentina has ratified a new social contract. Thank you very much for noticing us. Now we have a new principle, so we are not excluding per se. You are invited to participate. Look, I am a Meloni voter. I want to talk. Perfect. Sit down. It's even better. We are not excluding, but the only condition that we ask you is that you will respect the basic frame of Article 2, the moral, constitutional moral essence of the treaties, which is Article 2 of the Copenhagen criteria and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. I think you cannot aim with a social contract to deny rights to Muslim people. This is against the European. This article against it's not moral, but it's also against Article 2 and it's against our constitution, etc. That's in the basic, very basic terms. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your comments, Professor Kutay. I was going to start by mentioning what you were commenting in the end, that we are not excluding anybody, but we just have a precondition that is accepting Article 2 of the TEU and the fundamental values of the European Union. I mean, okay, perfect. You want to sit and talk and decide on what's the content of the EU social contract, it's perfect, but then before doing that, you need to accept that this is the red line and you cannot negotiate and you cannot violate these rights. So then you were mentioning also that civil society actors may have their own interpretation of the EU social contract. You were mentioning European Women International, the Greens, trade unions, and that this is probably politicizing the European Union. Well, it's true. It's true that we are probably politicizing the European Union because these, let's say, civil society organizations may use the social contract metaphor of the draft we are proposing in order to try to push for their ideas. It's true. But at the same time, I think it's an opportunity to discuss on these topics, and that citizens of or inhabitants or residents of the European Union deliberate and participate in the discussion of these topics, because one of the challenges I think nowadays exists is that most of people who live in the European Union are really far from the EU itself. So giving them the opportunity to discuss, I think it's better than the risk we are having of politicizing the social contract, which, well, I don't know whether I absolutely agree with you, but I can buy it. And I will end by commenting a couple of things. You were fine at the end mentioning that the EU foreign policy is failing, and that what's outside the European Union has an implication on what's happening inside. You were mentioning the war in Ukraine, but I mean, this has been happening for I don't know how many years. I'm younger than you, of course, but one of the main memories of the European Union I have is the 2015 migration crisis in the Mediterranean. This, of course, had an impact on the European Union, and that was something happening inside. Then this also had implications on how the European countries face, let's say, or interpret security threats coming from terrorism, and the link between, let's say, the migrants and terrorists, which at least I don't know in other European countries, but in Spain is gaining terrain on citizens. But apart from this, nowadays we are experiencing challenges with digitalization and how propaganda is being spread, misinformation and similar things. The climate change is also a global challenge, but the European Union is having a leading role in how to fight and combat climate change overall. I mean, there are some authors, I'm a lawyer, but I prefer the branch of international relations, and I think, I don't remember the name of the author right now, but calls the European Union as a green power. So, I mean, yeah, and finally, populism. The European Union is obviously facing populism inside, but also outside, because the populism that Milei or even Trump, who in my opinion is populist, have an impact on the European Union. Erdogan, yeah, of course. And yeah, the European Union foreign policy has failed. Well, I think I can buy you the argument, but at the same time, it's been evolving. It's been evolving in the last years. In 2016, the global strategy was passed, let's say, with the concept of strategic autonomy, trying to, let's say, act more individually when in situations of crisis, when the European Union cannot count with other allies, and similarly, 3-4 years ago, the strategic compass was passed. So these are documents that show that even I get back to the beginning of your comments, that even the, let's say, constitutional setup is okay. We cannot stay in the same point. We need to keep on evolving. So you were the EU foreign policy, although failed, I think it's an example of how evolution can help to adapt to the current circumstances. And going back to the question you were saying at the beginning, why we need a new EU social contract? Well, probably because the world is evolving, and I think that this evolution we are facing nowadays needs new responses to the challenges we are facing. And I think that the EU social contract may be a tool to maybe not respond, but to try to address these challenges. So yeah, that's more or less what I wanted to say. I think I covered all the topics. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me start, of course, by thanking the Sant'Anna team for having me. Thank you very much, Antoni and Jorge, for the presentation and for the paper. Really a rich paper, a sort of manifesto of this project. I understood a lot more discussion. I would have dozens of comments and questions. I will limit myself to 2 or 3 reactions on, let's say, each of those 3 thematic parts that I think are the core subjects of the paper. Now you have the first thematic part, that is a reconstruction of the historical, theoretical debates on social contracts. A focus on the EU specifically in terms of a proposal for a new EU social contract, for a new imaginary in the European Union. And third, the analysis on the specificities of the new contemporary social contracts, the importance of taking into account network societies, digitalization, and this kind of stuff. So, starting from, let's say, the theoretical part, and starting from, let's say, again, the grift. In terms of theories of social contract, for lawyers in general and constitutional scholars in particular, of course, the proposal for a new express social contract is very reminiscent of the various proposals on the opportunity of new updated treaties for the Union or a new constitutionalization of the Union and so on. Especially because you argue for an express social contract, while normally, let's say, traditionally, social contracts were taken in place into evidence. What are the differences at the formal level? It is a matter of jargon, no-legal jargon, general legal jargon. It's a matter of specificity. So the difference is the level of generality and specificities of the obligations we put in this contract. Are the differences in the procedure for the adoption of this kind of deliberation? Because in any case, we are talking of an express social contract, so there will be a kind of deliberation in your project. Is the difference in the procedure conducive to the deliberation? Of course, these are questions on, let's say, the formal aspects. Then, let's say, substantively, what are the differences in terms of criteria for a new social contract, especially vis-a-vis all debates on criteria for the constitutionalization of it? Once we talk of social contracts, so we take into account the social aspect. Social becomes relevant. Do we need to take into account, in your view, those old skeptic ideas like the no demos theory and the like, hampering, in theory, the possibility of constitutionalization of the Union because there is no demos, so there is no society, so there cannot be a constitution? Does the idea of a new social contract imply the existence of a society, or at least does the idea of a new social contract aim at creating a society? Second point, and second, let's say, thematic area. So specifically on your proposal of the The idea of the social contract, you make a very elegant and rich reconstruction of this respect in the first part of the paper, is an old political idea, still framed in juristic terms. Since the beginning, we talk about a contract. For many scholars, this is not without reasons. The idea was born in pre-modern settings, medieval settings, in which political contractarian elements were implicit in feudal relationship, in mercantile capitalist relationship, and the like. But there is also another reason. The historical cause of the rise of contractarian argumentation was the need to justify at a certain point the possibility of resistance to sovereignty authority. I have an obligation, but I can go against my obligation if I have to resist again an illegal, unacceptable authority against me. So, the possibility to justify resistance to sovereign authority. And to do so, already in those medieval theoretical reconstructions, in non-religious terms, in order to appeal across confessional divides in post-Reformation Europe. In federal debates, the same can be said in the North American federal debate, when Italian scholar Antoni discussed the contractual reference of American federalism. It was to stress the historical idea of some scholars and some southern states in the US towards nullification, towards a specific form of resistance to sovereign authority. If this is the case, and I would say this is the case, is the concept of social contract useful? Is the contractarian metaphor useful for nowadays Europe in a period of time in which the EU is basically in Ishmael terms polemical exits, while the Union is trying to foster loyalty and the exercise of voice in its political arena? Because I would say social contract, the idea of social contract is fraught with the idea of exit. And also, since it is not, I would say, entirely clear in your paper, when you argue for a new express social contract for Europe, are you implicitly saying that Europe has already experienced other forms of tacit, implicit social contracts? For instance, as I maybe understand, based on the role of Article 2, Article 6 of the Treaty, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, the Acquis Communautaire, and the Copenhagen Treaty, and so on and so forth. Then, the last point in this respect, you expressly link your proposal to this general debate, very much en vogue, on social imaginaries. And I went back to that original 2015 article by Adam, Stolblock, on social imaginaries in debate. No? And I noticed that they made use of those classic works by Cornelius Castoriadis, Paul Ricoeur, Charles Taylor, to argue that social imaginaries are paradigms in the making, in which social movements influence social change through the everyday practice of imagination, in political terms, in political economic terms, in ecological terms, and so on and so forth. So social imaginaries are, how can I say, the plebiscite de tous les jours. And I remember that symmetrically, in 2004, in 2006, after the collapse of the 2004 experiment to adopt a constitution for Europe, Richard Bellamy wrote the famous piece, "The European Union is Dead, Long Live European Constitutionalism," to argue that the focus on the constitution for Europe, the formal constitution of Europe, led scholars and citizens in general to neglect the real practice of constitutionalism, to shape through political constitutionalism, as they are. So again, in the everyday democratic practice based on constitutional practice. Question: how can your idea of a formal, express social contract to be proclaimed at a certain point can be coherent with these ideas, especially if you link your idea with this debate on social imaginaries? So, and in particular, and how it can be coherent with the idea of shaping a new imaginary that, according to scholars working in this field, is the work of the everyday practice, more of the result of a deliberation. Third thematic point on, let's say, network society, digitalization, and so on. The importance of taking into account these aspects. Are network society, digitalization, new instruments for a new social contract, in your view, in your proposal, or are they new objects of such a new social contract? Some thematic things to be regulated by your social contract, or both. And do these instruments, if they are instruments, have a specific role in the European Union, in the diverse setting of the European Union, to bring, as the motto goes, unitas in diversitate? These instruments can be fruitful in any constitutional experiment nowadays, but maybe they can have a particular role in the European Union, given the, let's say, ambiguity on the existence or not of a proper society. And then, in normative terms, I get from your argumentation on this that you are quite optimistic on the role of network society and digitalization in fostering new political spaces and new political movements. Still, I would say, but this is normative, also in terms of my value judgment in here, that in empirical terms, in the last decade or so, new political movements shaped by digitalization were traditionally populist, not always very much democratic, in many senses problematic. To what extent can we really rely on network society and digitalization for a fruitful, new, constructive experiment of a new policy? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for all these questions and insights, and I really appreciate your comments. Some of them I don't have the answer. I mean, I'm honest. We don't have. It's not the debate. I wanted to say something that you said. We understand that social contracts are living documents, right? So let me start by the last of your. I want to go from the last to the first, right? Because where is more fresh. So about now it's Antoni Abat answering. So it's not the members of the consortium, etc. So network societies as a new social contract and new objects, what do you think, regulation, blah, blah, blah. So are you optimistic? I am. This is for sure. And I've been not only this, but in life, also in this approach to network societies. Even in constitutional law, I published a book recently on constitutional processing using network societies in order to further participation, deliberation in constitutional issues, etc. So I am optimistic, and I assume this level. I've been criticized, not criticized, but simply, for example, with Professor Miguel Maduro, he's working on these issues, and said, but you are very optimistic in this sense. I say, yes, I am, and probably not very pessimistic, because I agree that probably, but maybe you will also agree with me that maybe my approach is optimistic, but also the other approach is pessimistic in the sense that it depends where do you put the light. You said that the experience shows us that this has been a failure, populist experiences, etc., etc. It's true, some of them. Again, the example of Iceland, the example of the Constitution of Mexico, the example of other, the assemblies, private assemblies, that shows that we have also good results of education. But not now, since the Foro Fortaleza people discussing and the Arts Convention. So we are implementing, and this is, I think, one of the new trends of the European Constitution. Then it's not that I am optimistic, yes, but I think that is something that we cannot see. I mean, I hate to comment, but I wrote a paper which on the almost digitalis, which it was an evolution of the homo videns Sant'Anna, the maestro Sant'Anna. So, and how this implicates nowadays, even from a biological perspective, kids will go to doctors in Barcelona, when they give them a book, they don't change the pages as we do. They do like this kind of thing. So you cannot maintain a conversation with my students looking at the eyes because they feel threatened. They are used to. So all these things are changing even from a biological perspective. So you can imagine how the language, they don't use the phone to do phone calls. They do WhatsApp. Otherwise they feel easy. Young people. So these are changing the ways of communication, but also the content. So what I'm saying is that we need to adapt ourselves to the reality that we face. It's not a question that we can ask. It's a reaction that is, and we need to, again, a crisis opportunity, use networks in a way that benefits democracy, blah, 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 blah. So it is hard, it is. We need regulations. Indeed. There are examples of regulations on how to make and this is also related with a bigger, by far, debate on who is ruling sovereign the power of Facebook, as you know, right? So it is true, I am optimistic. But this is me, Antoni, Abat, so but when we approach digitalization, it's not only about how do we use network societies and network realities, custodialis and all this crowd, etc., but also digitalization as a disruption. So the idea is that it may disrupt the social contract. So we will analyze how, from a pejorative or a bad sense, how digitalization may disrupt an agreement. Again, please, I know it's hard, also for me. Maybe the goal is not the social. The goal is to discuss about the social contract. This is the main idea. I know it's less romantic, because I sell to the European Union, we will have a contract. But this is the idea is to discuss it, to involve the people in things that are far from them, that they think they are far. When I ask my students, okay, what is the European Union? They don't know that they are paying with euros because my students have 20 years or so. They have more with the euro. They don't know that the building is built and reviewed by the European money. I suppose that they can cross to France, which is very close to our border, with a bike. So all these kind of things we need to. This is the idea, and this is exactly what Charles Mill says to correct the race structural deficiencies of our political systems. Right? What else? Are you saying that the European Union has already experienced private social contract? It did. I think it was. The thing is, the origin of the European Union is a social contract. So that's why it's a renewal, and we want to keep and as we can, knowing that 21st century is not like in the Second World War period, but we need to come to kind of basic structure of solidarity. Social contract is this will be more cognitive linguistic interest. We can discuss what is social sociality. This is a discussion that we can open. I will feel very comfortable. But I understand that this is not always the case. Then, how can we be coherent with social imaginary? Are we shaping a new imaginary? I think this is exactly the question. I say very well, but this is the question that when I wake up and I say, okay, are we doing a new? Are we doing new people? And you know how I visualize this in the beginning of the draft that I want to submit to my colleagues is to write, we the people of Europe. Because if Americans use imaginary and everybody knows it's a fake, why we cannot use the same with social engineering? With the people that we were constructing, building up reality, or with the peoples. There are a lot of discussion points. If you ask me, as a very Hispanic bishop asking, I will tell with the people. And let's see, let's go to the Boxing Day and discuss about this. We are constructing, or we are collaborating in the construction without not being in a moment where it's shaking because we know nationalistic approaches not only it's even counterproductive. So we need to analyze whether it will be so counterproductive and it will end by ruining the project. That's exactly the question. And the answer is we don't know so far. Again, I'm answering myself down in Abat, so I don't know whether my other colleagues will agree. But I would like to collaborate, to participate. I think it will be good to participate in this debate on constructing a new people of Europe, which is not necessarily contradicting because you are European because you're Italian, or I am European because I am Catalan and I am Spanish, right? So I mean, there's no conflicting identities in that sense. I will feel very comfortable saying with the people of Europe, but maybe some people will say no, because we need to have specific recognition of the boy, as the was mentioned there. I really like it to very Rousseauian the statement on the resistance. I like it. I really like it. I don't know whether it is always the case as this because it was an implication, right? I mean, the origin is to provide. It's not to. I think if we go to Vox again, it's not that the resistance because you are not fulfilling your obligations, which it was also mentioned, by the way. That I provided with my parcel of sovereignty, my dominion, freedom of dominion, which is also from the School of Sant'Anna. I provided my freedom of dominion, and you provide me peace, and in the case of Europe, which is the original social contract, welfare. So I don't know what is the case, but I mean, if we follow this more contractualist contract, as you mentioned, in more normative use privatum perspective, then it would be also resistance because if you do not fulfill, you have some. I mean, you lost your legitimacy. Then you talk about constitutionalization. Well, I'm a constitutionalist, so that means a lot of the scholars have defined constitutions as social contracts. And this is not new. And I think that maybe the question would be, are we making explicit the process of constitutionalization of Europe through a social contract? Maybe. Because the process is happening. Again, we are having a constitution, a material constitution. We have a process of constitutionalization, I think it's on the name. Well, you're a constitutional scholar, so you see how the EU has this constitutionalization. And this is something de facto, again, is shown by fact. So the social contract in one of the scenarios would be a sort of to explicitize that we are providing, we are doing constitutionalization of Europe, and this can be again open in this Pandora box or this taboo of the use of the concept of constitution in Europe, etc., etc. By the way, again, I recommend to follow the decision of the Constitutional Court in Portugal, saying that the EU law has primacy over the Constitution of Portugal, which is against the decision of the Constitutional Court in Italy, the Bundesverfassung the Spanish Constitutional Court, the Aros case in Denmark. But in Portugal, you know, primacy, supremacy, clearly by the Constitutional Court. Well, they still trying to understand how to fix it, but right. So on Jorge, on a specific procedure, each of the questions that you are, these are, I have no answer. I think they are all these are implications that we need to think about. It is true, because the jargon from a legal perspective is different from a social perspective, philosophical perspective, etc., etc. Specificity the same, and procedure well. I call them Galsenian, so see you, but I accept Galsenian friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just, I think you covered most of the comments. So just a brief comment on the issue of the networks. I think I'm not as optimistic as you. I think that the situation now is we're talking about who is the sovereign and how networks are being used, and I think we need to adapt both to who is the sovereign of these networks and to the, let's say, language used in those social networking sites. And on the other hand, what I also wanted to say is that nowadays, after the US elections, I think that it started with The Guardian in Great Britain, and then many newspapers, many people are leaving Twitter. I think that, well, you were mentioning the Reef Camp, the conceptual class. I think it's the same thing in this kind of Twitter, Facebook, or other social networks. I mean, I think we are in a clash or in a battlefield, and we cannot leave room to those Eurosceptics, populists, and that we need to keep on fighting, probably adapting ourselves to the language and to the different strategies that are being used in those social networks. But I think that we need to keep on trying to well, battle and gain the narratives over there. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. We have time for some questions from the I don't know if...
Yeah, maybe better. Yeah, because
Probably shy.
Yes, I'm a PhD student of Professor Martinikos. Super interesting presentation. I missed the first half of today, so apologies if this was covered then, but a couple of questions that came to mind as I was listening. The first of which, and they're not very well articulated, I'm just putting them out there, but the first one is, you mentioned a few times the role of Article 2 and that it's kind of the untouchable core of the project. But that had me thinking, how then won't this project just end up becoming a project of re-articulating Article 2? How isn't that where this leads? If you're saying that that is incapable of being touched and that all of the values contained in Article 2 are kind of what you're discussing, how isn't what you're discussing just a rediscussion of Article 2? Another question I had relates a little bit to what you just said before, which is to do with emphasizing that which is positive about the Eurozone and the EU. And my question is, instead of coming up with a new social contract, shouldn't more work be done on more clearly articulating the European state of nature? So I don't know whether another positive document articulating what Europe is actually useful at this particular point in time, or whether more emphasis should be placed on creating a document that emphasizes what Europe has been and what we don't want it to necessarily become. So they're my two questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Other, please.
Okay, I can just stick to that. I can speak now.
No.
Yeah. Very interesting presentations and discussion. I'm thinking about Article 2. These are basically universalist principles. So that of course brings in the question of the relationship between those principles and the Europe. Why a particular social contract for Europe? Or are you trying to flag also kind of a European model in a sense? Or is it simply reminding people that these are principles that we are all committed to, and in that sense we should all basically be abiding? So then the question takes up the European dimension. This is something worthwhile amplifying and defending in relation to the European context. I would wager there is, because I think we have more to lose because we have a more developed system in the first place, and it's been proven, and rather, in a sense, for us it's more like a defensive stance. But of course, that also comes into the whole idea of qualities and stuff, probably. But anyway, I'd like to push you on the European dimension. The other thing is an article by Ian Manners, where he's talking about European communion. I mean, so that's one term that might be of some possible relevance. And the other one is the planetary organic crisis he talks. Because you're talking about a number of
disruptive elements.
Yeah, disruptive elements. Now he is talking about this as kind of a syndrome, that these are all related. So I would like to push you on this. Do you see these as separate things? Or do you see them sort of more as a syndrome in the sense that they are combined? And if they're combined, in what sense will they be? Thanks.
Usually as well as almost at the end of 3 years of the
yes. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very clear and also very fascinating. I'm also the more pessimist person. And one question and one observation or remark. The question is, how do you want to avoid being elitist? Because if you say, okay, we want a discussion with the people, we want to bring this social contract theory outside, let's say, outside the academy. How to do that in order to, and also how to avoid at the same time being populist. So it's this is also related to the comments on digitalization, because of course, if you want to involve younger generations, you inevitably have to use instruments. You just cannot engage them in that way. This is one question. The remark on whether a contract or a declaration or as well as it was suggested, a manifesto would be suitable for. I would go maybe, so my humble personal opinion would be the manifesto, because it's more collective, it transpires and symbolizes an idea of participation, community, engagement, public, something collective, something which represents us. Which a contract for, especially for, and also this is also connected to the issue of being elitist and not being elitist. A contract is too legalish, maybe, for the common people. Of course, I understand, okay, the parties' rights, obligations, the possibility of exit. That's tricky. That's also a risk, maybe, that has to be taken or something taken into consideration. And that's it.
Thank you. I have a question last point. We said that social contract is a sort of living document, but at the same time it's linked with the European values and with constitutional matters also of the European Union. So in a certain way, the social contract could be binding for actors, people, on some part, if we intend that.
And how to enforce it at this point? So it's binding. So
So thank you. Other comments, please.
Couple of questions. I'm sorry because I didn't receive the paper, so I didn't get some. I wonder if regarding the overall project, are important also with countries or like this democratic policy project has some resemblance. And again, the question of how you reach to the people to discuss this and what you make of citizen assemblies of the experience of the conference in the future of Europe, and on the fact that the European Parliament did work so the conclusion of the conference to prepare its own treaty conference. The second issue is at the beginning the framework on the basis of Article 2 and so on. But you also put solidarity as the basis. There was a clear shift to the right both in European Parliament election and in the national election in general.
So the issue is, can the EU social contract based on solidarity survive, consolidate, or thrive even in a European Union and member states that are shifting to the rights? Because in the last few years, we got used to the rights being anti-European. But this was not historically the case. In 1984, Almirante, the leader of the Italian social movement, voted in favor of the treaty, because they believed that between the United States and the Soviet Union, Europe was the only way for Europeans to be independent, which is something the US and China that even still right today may understand. But definitely this would not be based on solidarity, even if it could be European social contract, even integrationist and so on. And the final issue is how do you frame the issue of sovereignty with relation to a social contract? Because usually, social contract is about equality, is about a collective that through the social contract define its own sovereignty. And again, this is related to discussion this morning about federalism and a different conception of sovereignty. This is a big issue because if we take the Federalist paper or Kenneth, where the Anglo-Saxon tradition of federalism, the concept of sovereignty is simply not there. It is not mentioned once, and the Federalist theory has difficulties, let's say, to cope with the concept of sovereignty. And an interesting attempt, I think, was by Micheletti, who suggested that in a federal system, sovereignty is nor of the federal level, nor of the federated government, but is of the whole federal system as such. But this is like in Italy, that sovereignty by the people that exercise by the means established by the Constitution, which is a multi-level system of government. But this goes very much against much of the whole philosophical sovereignty. But when you are discussing about the social contract, you are this is something that's be addressed as well.
We have 4 minutes. 4. Do you want to answer? Just some questions to have many things. Okay. Regarding the disruptive elements that Professor Bosch mentioned, as I mentioned, of course, we are analyzing them first individually, but then of course there are interpretations in them. I mean, I was putting before the example of populism and digitalization and how populists are using social networks. So, yeah, of course, there is a whole work package. It's work package 11, which is the full third year of the project, which is devoted to analyzing how all these elements interact with each other. I think it was your comment on the social networks and everything. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, we need to use them if we to reach young audiences, which is indeed one of the target audiences of the project, and we need to adapt our communication strategies to them. And I remember that when we were in Barcelona in March, we had this conversation with the colleagues of the European Movement. I remember we also talked about the last meeting that we had, on how we are, or we may be using the same strategies as populists in social networks. So the answer. No, but it's a good part. But I mean, I think there is a difference that is that we, or at least I don't know how are they doing it, because they are the experts who these things. We are respecting law, which is something that feminists using social media don't do. So we need to adapt our strategies. We need to use social media, but we need to respect the law. Maybe we are being less competitive, probably yes, but at least we are not losing, or we are not leaving the pool to reform. About how to force the social contract, well, that's a really interesting question. I think that in the case of the European Union, in a base case scenario, if the social contract draft that we are proposing, say, constitutionalized, whatever, there is the Court of Justice of the European Union. let's say, dealing with the enforcement of the treaty, which is something that, for instance, doesn't happen with international and reach to people that have also yes, this is done by colleagues of the European Movement International. They are an organization based in Brussels. They have, I don't know how many different civil society organizations which are part of them. Dozens. So they have they told us that they have the capacity to reach this 2.5 million to get discussion of the social contract and more than 1,500 reports in data. So it's quite a good figure. If you ask me exactly how are they doing it, well, I don't have the answer, but they are reaching them through them. They have this, let's say, network of networks, and they are our loudspeaker, but then they also have some different loudspeakers that can amplify our message. So that would be the main idea. And I think that's most of the things I want to address.
Okay, well, I have not a lot of time, but because all of these questions deserve a lot of time. So I really appreciate your questions. I really like your dialectic alien way of structure the article to re-articulation. I need to think about because I didn't apply this dialectic in order about if we will end re-articulated. We hope not. I mean, for me, it was a very clear example when you see Rousseau saying that a free man cannot rationally accept to be a slave. It's nonsense. Or if you read, I remember now, the people of democracy, what they say about democracy, has some values that you cannot dispute. That's it. So this is exactly how I structure my mind in order to apply this with Article 2 and with the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the Union. I mean, we are not talking about the whole Constitution, which according to ChatGPT is also part of that. But with this moral, vocal forming sense of the moral side of the Constitution, right? So this is untouchable. Whether doing this exercise we are re-articulated, we hope not. But it is true. Now I'm thinking when I'm talking that from this particular dialectic perspective, maybe we are doing what we do not want to. So I think it's a very good point. About the state of the euro, what's Europe? Well, we were saying that we are discussing whether to use people or peoples, and this is already a kind of via crucis because we don't know how it's going to end, and well, we're not going to be via crucis ended up. Hopefully we will escape that. But so yes, but so I mean. Now you're asking me to also say what's Europe. You know what I mean? I'm brave, but not maybe that much on the different. Yes, then very good question about why a social contract for Europe and not worldwide. I mean, the fast answer is because the European Union is staying, right? This would be the time very fast. Who pays rules? It is true that we have been thinking about that because some of the values are universal values. But if we scratch a little bit, we can see that some of the values that may be universal are not that universal. Maybe they are not, to be fair, but maybe they are not continuing to, maybe they're not, or they're not to that extent. I'm thinking, for example, of the concept of human dignity, which is a universal value, I would say, but not that much the concept of how do we understand the European Union, the rule of law, for example. So there are some values within Article 2 that I believe they have more constitutional identity trends. This is again me. So it's going to be complicated to narrow to the EU because we have different legal genealogies and understandings. That's why we would like to commitment and not to actual understanding of Article 2, right? So to spread, and then that will be a more cosmopolitan, this 20th or even Russian exercises of world, which is okay. I mean, but let's go step by step, I believe. But it's not a unique trend of the European Union. I agree on that because some of them are universal values. This is true. About this question of the supra or combined values that you mentioned in the paper of Marx, right? Some of them are, it's very hard to define whether they're supra or infra, right? So we need, this is also an issue that we need to consider whether, I mean, we are now, it's not 1 year of the project, so we need to figure out how we address this kind of questions. I think Jorge already asked some of the questions, and I really like it when you say, you know what, I think, I don't like manifesto, not because but I think more in a declaration, right? I believe in this epic declaration of the citizen, yes. But, and now I'm going to throw stones to the public law, I mean, if you follow, let's say, Cosquiniemi, more a legal realistic perspective, Cosquiniemi or Lufinas, they will tell you that in the public international law, these declarations, at the end of the day, they are not law. They are wishful declarations. So that, and prior to those two, so I tend to do something which has real empirical things. Meaning, not buying. Well, I mean, how? I mean, again, and this is something that probably would be, I don't know how we would measure it. I think that would be maybe a conclusion. I think you really take seriously the concept of legal social contract. So which you are already combines. At the end of the day, again, the goal is to discuss, to allow people to discuss, not to have a contract. Right? So we have, but once you are in, you say, well, once you are in, why you don't end, right? We will end hopefully with the whole foundation. But it depends also on the outcome. We cannot present a draft now, but we will end after the 3 years of having the back of the people that has been participating, that we are spreading as an institution to provide a solid documentation. Maybe my wish, this is a wishful thinking, will be this contractual and private law. Because I'm a Roman scholar, I'm from Federalism, so we are, Roman law is us, it's true here. So we still have the Roman institutions. Sorry? We still have the Roman institutions ruling our practice, and they are mandatory, very important. So for me, Facta Sunt Servanda will be the guide of this contract. This is a wishful thinking. Whether we will be able to do so, we will see. And if you will see the other way, so look, why don't we go with this contract? I'm sure I will answer you with some cons, the pros and cons of each of the options. So, well, thank you very much for all your comments. Questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this interesting session. Thank you for your presentation, your comments. It was a very interesting afternoon, and we are really happy to work on this project. So we will see in the next future the development also of this theoretical framework, definition, concept, and so on. So thank you very much to all of you.